Well, let's. Peter, it's correct that we've got 2 people to make it quorum.
Yes, that's right, Chair.
Yeah, okay, so okay. Welcome everyone. Just for pension boards remote meeting. Hope everyone's well. Be good if we just make sure we do some introductions, just because I'm not sure I know exactly the role everyone's playing here, so it'd be good to just sure we have shared understanding. So I'm Samantha Lloyd, I'm chair of the board. Michael?
So I'm Michael Honeysett, I'm interim head of pensions.
Sorry, there's 2 Michaels. Sorry for the confusion. Can't even say Michael H, can I? Michael Honeysett's now left. So he's the interim Rachel. Michael Hartley, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Michael Hartley, I'm the member rep on the pensions board. Morning.
Morning. Mario?
Hi, I'm Mario from Hackney ICT. I'm just here to provide technical support with the live stream.
Great, thanks, Mario. Catherine?
Hi, I'm Catherine Pearce from Aon. We're the Benefits and Governance Advisors to the fund.
Jackie?
Hi there, Jackie Moylan. I'm the new Director of Financial Management for the Council.
And Peter?
Peter Gray, Governance Services, Hackney Council.
Great. Okay, so welcome everyone. We'll take Hugo as an apology for lateness on this occasion. Shame something must have come up. Any declarations of interest to declare, Michael Hartley?
No. Other than what I've already declared as the third member of the fund.
Yeah, nothing further for me either. Okay, so we're going to start with some training about the exit cap. Much talked about, much trailed, finally here. So, Catherine, I assume you're going to be leading that item.
I am, yes, thank you. So I'm just about to hopefully share some slides with you. So hopefully in a moment you should see some slides pop up.
It says you're presenting.
It might just take a minute just to...
Yeah, they've just come up on my screen.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so let me just put it into the proper slideshow. Okay, so can everyone see that now as a proper slideshow?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So this is just a short session to give you an update on the exit cap. For anyone who's not familiar with this, this is a government policy to limit exit payments in the public sector to a maximum of £95,000. So the aim of this session is to give you a bit more of an update on that policy and where everything is at the moment within the LGPS. The reason we're covering this with you today is so that in your pension board oversight role, you have an understanding of the roles of the pension fund administering authority versus the role of the employer. And so you can be assured that the pension fund understands the implications for it and is taking the appropriate advice and taking the appropriate actions to put everything into place. This is what we're going to cover in this quick session. We'll look at the regulatory timetable. Then we'll go.
Hang on 1 minute, Catherine. There was a note from Hugo saying he was waiting to be let in. Peter, can you check?
Yeah, Mario, could you have a look, please? He's accepted on Google.
He's just sent an email saying he's waiting to be let in. It's hugosparks81@gmail.com is the email address.
Just to let you all know, while you're sorting out letting Hugo into the meeting, I can't actually see any of the videos now or see any notes popping up. So if you do want to ask any questions, you'll literally just have to interrupt me, I'm afraid, because I can't see you putting a hand up or anything like that.
Yeah, it's still not come in. Oh, okay. All right then, Catherine, carry on. We did ask people to try and join quite early.
Okay.
Stop this sort of thing. So carry on, Catherine.
Okay, so we'll cover the regulatory timetable. We'll look at how the cap will actually be implemented, and we'll also look further at some of the wider reforms that are also going on. As I said, please just interrupt me if you want to ask any questions as I'm going along, and there'll also be opportunity at the end. So the legislation timeline, it's been quite drawn out. The exit cap was first talked about back in 2015 in the Small Business Enterprise and Employment Act, which basically just gave the powers for a cap to be implemented at some point in the future. Things did go a little bit quiet then for a few years. Every so often someone would say from government that they were still looking into it, but nothing really happened until 2019 when a government consultation with some draft regulations and guidance came out. In July 2020, the government replied to that consultation. Mm-hmm. Much of what they'd put forward in the initial consultation hadn't changed. The most significant thing that did change was they initially proposed a two-stage implementation process. So some employers would have the cap implemented at one point, other employers would follow on later. But that wasn't popular, so it turned into a one-stage implementation. In November 2020, we then got the Treasury Regulations. So the point we're at now, which I will go into a bit more detail about, is that the legislation for the cap is now in force. The issue we have, however, is that the local government pension scheme regulations haven't yet been amended to keep up with the Treasury Regulations. So what we've got now is a period probably 3 or 4 months, we're not entirely sure, where the cap is in force and must be applied, but the LGPS regulations also state that a full pension must be paid in some circumstances, and we'll look a bit further at what that actually means in the next few slides. So just looking at the legislative timetable from 2020, the Treasury Regulations, the Restriction of Public Sector Exit Payment Regulations 2020 came into force on the 4th of November, which means that public sector authorities that are listed in those regulations cannot pay exit payments of more than 95,000. The exit payments include the obvious ones like statutory redundancy pay and other compensation payments made on redundancy and efficiency retirements. But importantly for the local government pension scheme, the exit payment cap also takes into account any strain payments that are paid to the pension fund for releasing pensions early. The local government pension scheme regulations as they currently stand state that if a person over 55 is made redundant, they're entitled to immediate payment of their pension, and that pension is not reduced for early payment, and the employer has to pay into the fund the difference between paying the full pension and paying what the reduced pension would be to ensure that the full pension can be paid. So we have this. Of course.
Catherine, can I just ask a question about that? Catherine, I have a question on that. So there's no option, because in some private sector pensions where somebody's over 55, but so they could put it into payment. If they do, they reduce it to actuary. There's a reduction for each year before the normal retirement age of the scheme, and there's no option. That's not the case. I just want to confirm in LGS, if you're over 55, you have to take it.
As the LGPS.
And it has to be paid and reduced.
As the LGPS regulations are currently written, if you're made redundant, you have to take an unreduced pension. There's no option. For other types of exit, so if you retire voluntarily at 55, the pension would be reduced for early payments. People retiring voluntarily can ask if their employer will release a full pension to them, and the employer pays the cost. And that's down to each individual employer to make a decision whether they would do that or not. But on redundancy, if the reason for leaving is redundancy, as the LGPS regulations are currently written, an unreduced pension is payable.
Okay.
And this is actually what's causing the problem at the moment, because what we now have is this situation where, on the one hand, you have legislation saying exit payments, including any pension strain, cannot exceed 95,000. And then on the other hand, you have LGPS regulations saying that a full pension with its associated pension strain must be payable. But obviously, if that pension strain, when added to any other exit payments, exceeds 95,000, you can see that we've got a problem that the two sets of regulations don't link together. So pension funds and employers are now in a little bit of a difficult situation in terms of which regulations do they follow, or try and do a bit of a mishmash of both. And there has been some guidance, which I will come on to in a moment. So the Treasury Regulations came into force, as I said, on November the 4th. MHCLG, that's the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, who is the government department responsible for making the local government pension scheme regulations, have issued a consultation to amend the local government pension scheme regulations to allow for the exit cap. As I said, that is only a consultation at the moment. The consultation on the policy around that closed on the 9th of November, and they have also issued some draft regulations, and the consultation on that closes on the 18th of December. You can see from that we're not likely to get any changes to the LGPS regulations until at least the new year, probably not till maybe February, March, depending how quickly they can push them through the parliamentary process. So it's likely that we've got this period of 3 or 4 months where the two sets of regulations won't tie up. So where we are now, as I said, we've got this discrepancy between the two sets of regulations. It's important to note, however, that the exit cap does only apply to public sector employers that are listed in the Treasury Regulations. So it applies obviously to Hackney Council, and it also applies to the academies that are in your fund. But there will be other employers in the pension fund that the cap does not apply to. So where you've got sort of private sector companies as admitted bodies, the cap does not apply to them. So it's important for the fund and the administrators to be clear which employers the cap does and doesn't apply for when making decisions what pension benefits to pay. I'll come on to...
Okay, I'm just going to interrupt you a minute there, Catherine, to welcome Hugo. Hugo.
Hi,
Just a minute. Hugo, welcome. Just a couple of things. Do you? We're doing some training.
Super.
Hi, Hugo. We're doing some training about the 95k exit cap regulations, and I'll summarise where we've got to, which is, despite these being talked about since 2015, the government has not tied up two parts of it. So the cap's in there, but then there are contradictory requirements, contradictory rules in the local government pension scheme. So so there's a pickle basically, because despite 5 years, they didn't catch up with the admin on it. And so where Catherine Thinker got to is telling us what the consultation is proposing to how it's going to change the LGPS, and that the vast majority of the employers, I think, in our scheme that we're looking at in Hackney will be caught by this, because materially there'd be either London Borough of Hackney or in academies, so that the number who are not public sector employers in our fund are probably quite a small number. Is that a fair statement on our numbers?
Yes, I believe it is. Michael can correct me, but
Okay,
I believe something like 95% of your employees are employed by either Hackney Council or academies. It's a very small number.
That's correct, definitely. Yeah.
So yeah, the majority of your members will be caught up, are employed by an employer subject to the cap. Perhaps a couple of other things just to mention around this, where we are now. The government have actually issued a letter to administering authorities stating that their stance is that the principle of implied repeal actually means overrides the LGPS regulations. So the government view is that funds can now pay a reduced pension in redundancy situations. However, the Local Government National Scheme Advisory Board has commissioned QC advice, and that legal advice has stated that implied repeal doesn't apply here. So unfortunately, what we appear to have is a situation where the right answer won't be known until a case makes it through a legal challenge, and we get a definite answer. So funds really are in a bit of a, funds and employers affected by this really are in a difficult position at the moment, because essentially whatever they do, they're at risk of challenge from someone, either the member who thinks they should be entitled to an unreduced pension, or potentially an employer saying they're unable to pay a strain cost relating to a full pension as a result of the cap. The Scheme Advisory Board has issued guidance to funds and employers, which suggests that until there is legal clarity, the best thing to do would be to pay a reduced pension or offer the member the option of a deferred pension. And there is the option under the Treasury exit cap regulations to make an additional cash alternative payment, as long as it doesn't exceed the overall cap. And they have suggested that is not paid at the moment by the employer. The reason they're suggesting that is once any legal challenge is known, either the full pension can then be paid or the additional cash sum could be paid. But the risk is that if a full pension is paid and then it turns out that it shouldn't have been, it's going to be quite difficult to recover the money. And equally, if a additional cash sum is paid, it could be difficult to recover the money if it subsequently turns out that it was incorrect to pay that. So it's all getting quite complicated, but essentially where we are now is that funds and employers need to be clear what they're going to do. Obviously, the guidance from the Scheme Advisory Board is only guidance, and it's up really to funds and employers to take their own legal advice and work out their own way forward. Obviously, taking the Scheme Advisory Board guidance into account if they wish to. And until we get the LGPS regulations in place, which I'll come on to talk about now, you know, we are going to be in this position of uncertainty for a few months, and unfortunately it's the members that are really going to be potentially caught up in the confusion, because they won't really know what benefits they're entitled to. I know a lot of employers some employers did bring forward redundancies to the 31st of October to get them through before the cap came in. Other employers will be trying to put back exits until there's some more certainty, but obviously that's not always possible. I don't know how affected Hackney are, whether there's any redundancies or so on that have to happen in the sort of next few months, but if there are, the fund and the employers will need to liaise quite closely together to be clear who's paying what, to make sure as far as possible it meets one or other set of regulations. So putting aside the current period of uncertainty, the MHCLG consultation put forward proposals to change the local government pension scheme regulations and the wider local government compensation on exit regulations. And these proposals are that the pension strain cost cannot exceed the cap, and it's going to be further reduced by any statutory redundancy payments the member's going to receive, and that will apply even if the member doesn't breach the cap. I think when the cap was initially talked about, people generally thought it really would only affect those whose exit payments exceeded 95,000, but it's clear that MHCLG are actually using this as an opportunity to reduce the pension benefits that are paid on exits even further for those who aren't affected by the cap. And this actually brings the local government pension scheme more into line with the other public sector schemes. For most of the other public sector schemes, they haven't been able to have a full pension on redundancy for quite a while without there having to be some give and take in terms of the other benefits they get. So even if a member has a statutory redundancy payment of say 20,000 and their strain cost is 30,000, they still won't be allowed to take a full pension. The strain cost would have to be reduced by the 20,000 statutory redundancy payment. So the strain cost could only be 10,000 in that example. So their pension will need to be reduced so the strain cost doesn't exceed 10,000. So even lower paid members are going to be affected in terms of what pension benefits they can take. However, members will be given the option.
So can you just run those numbers again, Catherine?
Yeah.
Sorry, Catherine, can you tell us? So they would have got 20,000 redundancy, and the strain cost was 30.
Yeah.
Is that the right way around?
No,
Sorry.
no, it's fine.
You just tell me those numbers
Yeah.
again.
So
Sorry.
if before the exit cap came in, if you had a member whose redundancy payment was 20,000, and if they took their full pension, the strain cost would be 30,000. Obviously, if you add those two figures together, it doesn't breach the cap. However, once the LGPS amendments come in, the proposal is that for that member, the strain cost would have to be reduced to 10,000, which is obviously the 30 less the 20,000 statutory redundancy payment. So in future, they won't get the full unreduced pension. It will be reduced in as much as it generates a strain cost of £10,000.
Okay.
Yeah, it is quite complicated to understand, and it is going to be tricky to explain to members, which is one of the challenges facing funds and employers in future. There are going to be options, though, where that happens for the member to buy out the reduction in strain costs. So obviously the member in that case will have had their £20,000 statutory redundancy payments. So they could just then pay that to the fund to buy out the reduction in the pension. Or they can take the statutory redundancy payment as it is and have the reduced pension, or they can defer taking their pension until they reach their normal retirement age. But the basic message to take away there is members facing redundancy will all in future not have the full pension and redundancy payments that they've had until now. One of the issues that has been facing funds is the valuation of strain costs. Up until now, funds have had their own strain costs, usually provided by their actuary, and those strain costs are sufficient for the fund based on its own funding level and the makeup of the employers within that fund. What that means, of course, though, is you could have two otherwise identical members where the strain cost could be quite different depending which fund they're in and the basis of the factors used. And that's obviously not very fair when it comes to something like the exit cap, that one of those members might be able to go without being affected by the cap and the other would be affected depending how the strain cost is calculated. So therefore, what the MHCLG are proposing is that standardised government actuary department factors are brought in. Those factors have been issued in draft, but are not yet formally in force. They will come into force presumably at the same point that the LGPS regulation changes come in. In the meantime, however, funds will need to decide whether they continue to use their own factors for calculating strain cost or whether to start using the GAD proposed factors now. Because obviously the exit cap is now in force, but until they come into force legally, there's no compulsion on funds to use the GAD factors, so funds can continue to use their own strain factors if they want to. But once those factors come into force, it will mean that nationally across the board, strain costs are being calculated in the same way. So there shouldn't be any sort of postcode lottery when it comes to strain payments. One thing just to note though, it will still be open to funds in future to use their own factors for employers that are not subject to the cap. So Hackney, if it wanted to, could continue to use its own factors if there's any redundancies from an admitted body, for example. That's obviously a decision that needs to be made in conjunction with the actuary, because it will obviously affect the funding level of the scheme. As well as the pension changes, there are some wider reforms that are going on. There are proposals to actually reduce the overall compensation that can be paid in redundancy situations. So we have a look on the right hand side of this slide where it's got employer lump sum compensation. You'll see some proposals there to limit the maximum amount that could be paid as redundancy and discretionary compensation payments. Currently the only limit is that it has to be a maximum of 104 weeks pay. In future, there will be limits of a maximum of 3 weeks pay for each year of service, an overall maximum of 66 weeks pay, and it will be based on a maximum salary of 80,000, and that 80,000 pay level will increase by an as yet unspecified measure. So it will keep pace potentially with inflation or pay awards, depending what measure they choose. There's also, there has been talk over the last few years that another thing the government wants to bring in is the clawback of exit payments, where somebody returns to the public sector within 12 months of receiving exit payments. So that is something that's been talked about, but as yet there is no proposal for that to be implemented in the very near future. But it's something to be aware of that could be brought in the future. So the consultation, as I say, it opened on the 7th of September 2020, closed on the 9th of November 2020. So we are waiting now to see what the responses were. I think last I heard there was something like 400 responses to the MHCLG consultation. So it's obviously going to take a little bit of time for them to work through all those responses. And it remains to be seen what, if anything, changes as a result of those responses. But you can see from the wording on the left who will be affected by the proposed changes. This slide really just summarises some of the other things to take into account and the complications that are being faced at the moment. As I mentioned with the GAD factors, the fund will now need to decide whether to adopt the GAD factors now or wait until they come into force officially whenever the LGPS regulations are introduced. The waiver on the cap, there is a process in place where the cap can be waived in certain circumstances. there's quite a lot of hoops to jump through because it has to be approved by full council and then go to the Treasury and ultimately be approved by the Secretary of State. So it's not a very easy process to get through, and there's some draft guidance, actual guidance on that now released. Interestingly, in Wales, because of their devolved administration, it's up to Welsh ministers how they deal with the waiver. And Welsh ministers have already issued a letter stating that they intend to use that waiver process to take pension strain payments out of the exit cap. So a lot of the issues that we've just talked about won't apply in Wales if that does go through as they've indicated, which is a bit of a shame. Obviously, we have an England and Wales LGPS, so it's a bit of a shame that things don't tie up across those two countries, but that's the nature of the devolved administration. So I've mentioned,
and Catherine, as the English, as the Treasury indicated, what they'd be minded to agree waivers for, or none at all? It's so
not
marvellous.
yet. I think it's still a little bit unclear. There are some exceptions in the legislation already. So I think one of the key ones is where exits are happening as a result of whistleblowing. Is one automatic exemption from the cap, and ill health retirement exits on ill health also are automatically exempt. In terms of the waiver, there's also potentially going to be an easier process where it's unavoidable. So some councils are going through, for example, in Northamptonshire, they're having a reorganisation and moving to 2 unitary authorities rather than one county council and several district councils, and obviously as a result of that streamlining there will be redundancies, so there are discussions going on about whether those exits will be subject to the cap, because those would be forced by Northamptonshire's financial situation, so it would be quite difficult for the cap really to apply in those situations. There are discussions there, but in terms of your average council putting forward a waiver request, there's not really any guidance yet as to the type of case that might apply. I think it's going to be interesting when the first one goes through and you start to get an idea what may or may not be approved. But I certainly don't think there's going to be any chance for a council to be able to put through blanket waivers for lots of people, unless it's an exit for specific reasons that maybe aren't the council's own decision. Like I said, like the situation in Northamptonshire where it's almost been forced on the council to do a particular course of action.
Okay, those sound like sensible categories of that you would hope that a waiver would be granted, but yeah, thanks.
As I mentioned, the Scheme Advisory Board advice is to offer a deferred benefit or reduced pension, and for the employer not to pay any cash alternative while any challenges run through. As I said, that's up to the fund to decide what process they want to follow, but unfortunately whatever the fund and the council do, there will be challenges from members, especially if they're in the union, because the unions will advise them what the unions believe they're entitled to. And unfortunately, until these legal challenges go through the process, there's not going to be a definitive answer of what's correct or not. So it is going to be a bit of a horrible situation where the fund and the council are basically having to say to members, we're not 100% sure what you can have, so here's the minimum until we get some clarity, is essentially the potential position. But it is open to the fund to still pay a full pension if they want to, but then there's the risk that they won't be able to recover the strain payments and so on, or recover any payments to the member if it subsequently turns out that a full pension shouldn't have been paid. So it is recommended for that reason that funds and employers get their own legal advice. There's obviously a lot of administrative issues here, both for Equinity and the pensions team within Hackney Council. Lots of liaison with employers will be needed, particularly in determining whether the cap applies or doesn't apply to a particular employer. And for Equinity in particular, potential systems upgrades needed or manual calculations before those happen, to be able to deal with the relevant calculations. There's funding issues if the full strain costs aren't able to be collected, and also the fund will want to look at how different the proposed GAD factors are from the existing factors. I'm sure the actuary has already been providing guidance on that, because if the GAD factors are significantly different from the current factors, that will also have an impact on the level of funding. Members moving, less of a problem for Hackney really, as you have so few employers that will be affected, but the potential for members to move between capped and non-capped employers could lead to confusion. That might apply for some of your academies if they outsource services and the member goes from being employed by an academy to an outsourced service. So the message really is communication is vital between the fund, the employers and the members, to make sure that everyone understands the implications of what's going on. That's quite a brief whistle-stop tour through the exit cap. Lots of uncertainty, and lots of guidance and help is being provided from the Local Government Advisory Board and Local Government Association and the Scheme Advisory Board, which is proving very useful to funds, but unfortunately it's going to be quite a time of difficulty until any clarity is reached. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Catherine. That's very helpful. It just seems very, very complicated.
You were saying no, Michael. Sorry, Michael Hartley. Go ahead.
Sorry. It seems very, very complex from a member's point of view, which option to take. I guess it seems that all the authorities impacted are potentially vulnerable to complaints from members if they pick the wrong choice of unreduced pensions, a cash payment, or a deferred pension.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the unions will be encouraging members to put in complaints for anything they don't agree with. But it's difficult to know what the correct legal position is because of the conflicting legal advice.
I guess one of the points you touched on was that authorities, taking advice and making some decisions in the interim. I just wondered if Hackney has progressed that in any way.
So if I come in here,
Yeah, if you're answering the Hackney question, Michael Honeysett, before you do that, can you give us a view of the numbers of staff is likely to be affected, the predictions on that? Michael Honeysett.
Well, once we go forward or at the moment? At the moment, we've only got one person who, under the old VR scheme, voluntary redundancy scheme, due to be made redundant, but that's not until June or July next year. So obviously we've got time to work through and hopefully get some more guidance, proper legal position on where things should lie. In the meantime, we're just talking to the actuary at the moment. We've got a meeting shortly to be arranged with the actuary to talk about things like the GAD factors, the factors, etc. And we're just waiting for, really at the moment, for the response on the consultation to see where it goes, because I say we're fortunate that at the moment we've got no one in that position that we're waiting to let go. Obviously there are restructures happening though, or in the pipeline, and that will cause issues around providing quotes, etc. So at the moment we're providing quotes, which are just caveated that the fact that the 95k cap is sitting behind at the moment. But so caveating at the moment, pending that advice and guidance. So in short, we're fortunate that we've got no one immediately waiting to go under redundancy. But clearly we do need to move forward and get some of these issues sorted.
Does feel a bit like an own goal, because kind of whatever you think of the cap and whatever you think about how to resolve it, if it something that was proposed in 2015, it doesn't take long to kind of get to the question of the strain payment and then decide how to deal with it. Kind of almost, there are two questions. One, it's like timeliness of administration of this one, because the last thing we need is more uncertainty. The last thing any of the schemes need is more uncertainty. So let's hope it resolves quickly. Points of view about which way it should resolve, and that's kind of a separate question, really. But it just needs to be resolved because you know, the uncertainty, and it does feel a little bit wolf in sheep's clothing to be using something that was that in you know, in all of the discussions about it, it was always positioned as a high earners, an issue for high earners, and it looks from Catherine's presentation like lots of actually much more modestly paid people are getting caught by this, which you got to hope wasn't the intention.
No. And that's always,
you know.
yeah. I mean, that's something we've always flagged in our responses to all the various consultations that come out, that it would always hit people lower down, particularly where they'd had long service, etc. But the actual regulations that they've talked about, the MHCLG regulations, where they're saying that you can't take they hit the lower paid even more so, with that restriction on the redundancy being taken away from the pension strain, etc.
Yeah. Okay, that was great bit of training. Thank you very much, Catherine. That's great, and thanks a lot. Okay, we'll go back to the main. Hugo, welcome. People introduce themselves. Do you know everybody, or would it be great for people to introduce themselves?
Well, I know you.
I know you, Hugo, me better than that. So,
and I recognise Michael from our last meeting, but I'm not familiar with everyone else. So, hi guys and ladies and gentlemen.
So, Jackie Mullins, Director of Financial Management at Aon. Mario's from IT and Services. Peter Grace, and you know Michael from Michael, both Michaels, Michael Hartney. Yeah. Okay. Hey, Michael Honeysett, I assume you're going to talk to the staff changes on item 5.
Indeed. Sorry, let's just, okay. So basically, I thought it'd be useful just to bring there have been quite a few changes on the pensions teams, on both sides, both the pensions admin and the actuarial and investment side, partly due to, or mainly due to the VR exercise actually that was took place earlier in the year, and also due to a couple of people on maternity leave. So in short, if you probably easier to go to the very last part of the report where there's the current structure chart, then I can just talk through the changes that have happened from that one. So para 611 of the report, there's a little structure chart there. So previously, of course, I was Director of Financial Management.
Yeah.
I've taken VR myself as part of that process and left, and actually ended up leaving the post at the end of September. And as before explained, Jackie, who's obviously here, is now Director of Financial Management. So that's one change that happened. Rachel Colburn, who was the Head of Pensions Investments at Actuary, is on maternity leave. And we did look to fill that role on a basis outside of the council, but really struggled to fill the role. So I was asked if I would step in and cover Head of Pensions role until Rachel comes back. Hence my role on this board now. As part of the VR exercise, we did a small restructure in the pensions team. So you might remember before we had a Head of Pensions Administration, who was Julie Stacey, who reported to the Director of Financial Management. And then we had the head of, so Rachel also used to report to me as Director of Financial Management. As part of this restructure, so Julie left, and we got rid of that post and created a new post, Pensions Manager, which now reports through to me at the moment. It will be Rachel going forward, obviously. So we brought the two sides of the team together, really, and then the Head of Pensions reports direct to Jackie, picking up both sides. The reason we've done that role in place, the Pensions Manager, is to refocus the admin side just on employee admin and any employer functions, such as TUPEs in and things like that, are solely now on the other side of the structure charts, where you can see the group accountant, etc. They deal with all the employer role. So we've really tried to refocus the pensions admin team, really, to to ensure that they are focused on the admin management of that contract and the in-house admin function. So at the moment, the pensions manager, which is the new role, we've got Lucy Patchell is acting into that role. Now, she previously, her substantive role is the pensions officer. So you can see the vacant post there. And I'm just about to go out to recruitment to actually fill that permanently. And we're going to go internal with that one. So we're hoping we can fill that internally. You'll also see on the other side of the structure chart, we've got the group accountant is filled by a secondment. So the previous group accountant left as part of VR, and another post was actually taken out of the structure to cover that redundancy, to ensure saving was made. But Morgan Williams, who's on secondment, he's on a year secondment to cover that group accountant role. The good thing about that is Morgan's been with the wider financial services team since he came to the council several years ago, and he's been heavily involved in pensions work, that side of the pensions work in any case. So he's very au fait with the sort of work that needs to go on there. And then we've also got the project accountant who's currently on secondment because the person on substantive is actually on maternity leave also. So as I said at the beginning, there's quite a few changes taken place, but I think we're confident that because of the experience of the team that have taken up the interim roles and the people that are left behind in their substantive roles, that we've got a fairly consistent team going forward in terms of being able to take forward some of the projects that we'll talk about later, etc., and make sure that the pensions team does deliver what it's there to do. So yeah, any questions really?
I have a question about in the structure. How are these? So presumably, head of pensions and is paid for out of the pension fund. Is charged to the pension fund. How much of the rest of it is it? Okay, yeah. Run me through how it's charged. How much of it is charged to the pension fund? How much is an LBH cost?
I can't remember off the top of my head all the percentages, but obviously, so some of the employer role for these teams and the group accounts, etc., will certainly be employer and therefore charged to the council's general fund. The pensions admin team is largely, and will be more so now that it's more focused on pensions admin, is largely all charged to the pension fund. Obviously, the head of pensions, I can't remember the split now, but I think it's 75-25 pension fund, non-pension fund. But I can get back to you with the revised. But we are looking at that at the moment just to make sure that the recharges reflect the actual new structure and the roles that they're carrying out.
Okay. All right. Michael Hartney, any questions?
I just thought there was quite a few changes within the pension fund. When you look at the complexity of what's coming on down the line. It was nice to hear you, Michael, say that you're confident that we've got the right mix of people to deal with that complexity. But I guess a little bit concerned with GMP equalisation, representation, pension statement continuing issues and things like that. Yeah. Whether we've really got the in-house ability to deal with that.
Yeah. So yeah. I've got an update on those projects a bit later on. But GMP, for example, is nearing its end and has been largely led by Equinity with the in-house admin team. That team is still there, apart from Julie, but they're still working on that, and we're aiming for a February completion of that, which is on target as far as that's looking hopeful. Go on, Jackie. Yeah.
I think it's probably Michael. It's worth adding here that probably one of the important factors is that we've been able to maintain quite a bit of continuity through this process. So Michael mentioned that we did go out, for example, for potential interim head of pensions. We didn't find anyone suitable at the right rate that would be able to carry the sort of the demands of what this role needs over the next 6 or 7 months while Rachel is on maternity leave. So I think that having Michael in as interim head is an advantage and sort of helps us maintain that continuity and focus on those issues which have been identified for improvement, really.
Yeah, I mean, I recognise that having Michael as continuity is a huge, positive, but down below there still appears to be a bit of change, which is a bit unfortunate with what's coming on down the line.
Okay, Hugo, have you got any questions or comments?
No questions for me at this time. Thank you.
Okie doke. Great, thank you very much. Pensions committee work, agenda item 6. Who's going to speak to that? Is that you, Mike, again, Michael?
Yeah, no, once I can find, I've just lost all my papers. Just bear with me, I've just lost all my papers. Let me get them back up again. Oh, what's happening?
All right, well, I'll pop in my question then I had on this one so that you can cover it when you introduce it. So
okay.
in para 6.8, you talk about a revised and updated actuarial benefits and governance consultancy framework, because you've rolled the an extension with the Hymans and Aon piece. And I wondered if you could just talk us through what was part of your introduction.
Yeah.
Do you want me to pick that up, Michael, while you
Yeah,
look for
you
your
can.
papers?
I'll try and find my papers again. Yeah. Thank
Yeah. So when Hackney last let both its actuarial and its separate benefits and governance contracts, they used a framework that was set up by the Norfolk Pension Fund that's run on behalf of all the LGPS funds. So the framework is there to ensure that funds basically run competitions in the most effective and efficient way. So the framework basically does a lot of the work for funds, and funds can then just use the framework to choose the provider they want from the framework. So what the updated framework is referring to is the original actuarial benefits and governance framework was set up in 2012. It was refreshed into a new framework in 2016. And it was due to be refreshed into a new framework in 2020, because each framework lasts for about 4 years. That's been slightly delayed due to COVID, but the intention is that by next year there will be a new framework up and running. So our Aon's contract and Hyman's actuarial contract was extended. Were both extended with the intention that when they are relet next year, the new framework will be in place. Because otherwise, if Hackney had done the reletting this year, it would then be on a framework that perhaps wasn't as up to date as it's already 4 years old. So the new framework will reflect any developments that have happened in the last 4 years and just be a little bit more up to date.
Thanks, very, very clear. How are you doing, Michael Honeysett? You got your paperwork back?
I've had to go into my drive to get them from there, but I've got them in some way, shape or form. So yeah, okay. Let me just check what. So doing review of committee work. Okay.
So you're talking to us about April to September pensions committee work. It was item 6.
Indeed. I've just got the paper back up now. Okay. So the purpose of this report is basically just to give a summary of the work of both committees that have taken place since the last board. So that was one in June 2020, and the last one being September 2020. As noted in the paper, there was also a workshop outside of those two committees, which was to help discussions around some of the investment strategy papers that would then go on to committees. So I'll just go through the main papers that were discussed. What we have done, usually obviously we include the links to these papers in this actual paper. Because of the problems with access to our systems, we've been unable to do that. So I believe Peter's actually sent everyone copies of the committee papers separately, so they are available to members as part of that. So the June paper, the June committee was quite an important one because it started reviewing the investment strategy timetable and investment strategy statement update. We had to review it quite quickly because obviously the March, we were due to have a committee in March, which actually got cancelled because of the COVID, and we were still looking to implement these types of arrangements where we're having virtual ones. So we had to rejig some of the agendas, and so the June committee was largely to get stuff that needed to be done quite quickly and move forward. So we gave to that committee an update on at that stage the impact of COVID-19 and set out some of the changes we've made to the admin procedures to ensure that we could actually still process benefit payments and get pensions into payments, things like death grants, etc. So we changed some of the documentation requirements around those to make sure we could still proceed with those quickly. It also gave an update on the overall funding and investment strategy at that stage, which was set out in the COVID-19 report. And basically, at that stage, obviously, markets had taken a tumble, but had pretty much recovered again by the time of that committee. So the funding level had gone right down from about 90 odd down to about, I think it was mid-70s. And by the time we got to that committee, it had recovered back up to mid-80s. But obviously, as we all know, as we set out in that paper, they certainly weren't taking any knee-jerk reactions, and that's still the case because obviously pension fund investments are a long-term, take a long-term view. The quarterly update reports in both June and actually September. I suppose the main things I'd pull out of those was the administration of Liquidity, where it was quite clear that at first they did struggle with COVID and the impact of that on their working arrangements. And you could see that from some of the key indicators around the amount of work they're actually processing on time. Glad to say by September that had recovered significantly and continues to do so. So I think that's just where they weren't used to working from home, for example, whereas our own admin team, we already had a good infrastructure in place to be able to do that and didn't impact the in-house team in the same way. Already spoken about the actuarial benefits contracts, so I won't go over those again. And then there was some training and initial strategy around a new asset class, potentially of infrastructure. September committee, they had the same paper around staffing arrangements. Obviously, it's important that the committee understood the changes as well. We had further training on investment strategy and training, and then and picked up, as I say, on some of the work that we did at the workshop, feeding through to that paper. Pensions admin strategy was formally agreed at the September committee. That had formally been to pensions board, so that just finished its process. Importantly, the pension fund report and accounts obviously, well, they weren't approved at pensions committee because strangely they're approved at audit committee as the regulations require, but they were noted by the committee and they approved them for publication, although we are still awaiting the completion of the audit on that side. So, pensions committee business plan is a separate item on this agenda, so I'll go through that then. And then we took through pension budget for the year, and also just slightly updated the pension fund treasury strategy. So that was really for cash holdings and making sure the way they're managed is in line with how the council manages its own cash. Yeah, as said, we've also had a workshop in July, which was really to look at some detail about investment strategy, to get some ideas on the members of the committee on investment beliefs, etc. And they'll be taken forward in next committee, and indeed another workshop that's coming up next week to go into further detail around investment strategy. And that's really going to be the focus of the work over the next couple of months. Well, the next two committees is finalising the new investment strategy, along with some other important policies and procedures that we need to take through. and updates on some of the projects, which again I've got later in this meeting. So yeah, any questions really?
Any questions, Hugo?
Sorry, I'm on mute. Not
Okay.
for me.
Michael Hartney, any questions?
I just wondered, Michael, had there been an update on the CIV and the appointment of chief?
On the
Chief
appointment.
investment officer on the
Do you want to
London
repeat yourself,
CIV?
Mike Hartney?
Yep. So we haven't done enough. So we're due to do an update I think at the next committee on the position of the CIV. But certainly, obviously, we came to the board was it last time, or no, it might have been the time before.
Yeah, November.
Yeah, it was, isn't it? So they have got a chief investment officer. Obviously, the new chief exec officer is certainly in place and is certainly changing the way they're working with the boroughs in terms of better coordination with us and consultation. Still work to do there, certainly, but definitely seems to be a better engagement. I think the investment officer, I need to check this, but I think they're still on an interim and looking to go to permanent recruitment, but I'll check the position on that, and I'll just send you a separate note just to update you. But certainly things are, I think the important thing with the CIV was the lack of engagement previously, and I think since we've had the new chief executive officer there, and certainly they've taken other members of the team there, things seem to be improving, and they're engaging more with different authorities about what the authorities require for their investment strategies, etc. So it's looking hopeful.
Okay, thank you.
I have a further question, Michael. Are there any emerging findings on the where their investment strategies going?
So I think that there is. So the paper. So some of the considerations around reducing some of our reliance on equity, and certainly on the UK market. So moving probably more further into global, which obviously will pick up UK investments as well. But that's really to try and, obviously the UK market is just really what's the word I'm looking for, is really focused on certain areas which we can diversify more if we go more global. I think we're probably looking towards a bit more income rather than protection at the moment. We still obviously got a funding gap, not as high as it was, nowhere near as high as it was the last time round. So we're starting to look more at managing cash flow as well. Whilst we're still cash flow positive, that is moving in the wrong direction. So we're not as cash flow positive as we were in previous years, and that's likely to continue as obviously membership not dwindles, but certainly isn't growing as fast as it was before. So yeah, well, it's really around the reduction in equity allocation. A possible, well, there will be probably a move into some sort of renewable infrastructures, but at a low, certainly not at a high level in terms of amounts invested there, but it will be a start in there.
Low
and obviously looking at our responsible investment policy and how that interacts with it as well. So,
ESG.
Yeah, all those are starting to play into it. So there's quite a detailed draft paper at the moment for the workshop, which will then feed into January's committee for formal decisions around those.
Can I ask Peter Gray if you could send the invitations for the pension committees boards to all members of the, if we're, if we're able to, then it's we've got all the details to join it, because we meetings, aren't they? Because they're public meetings, albeit with some exempt section. But so that would be quite helpful if we have them in our diaries.
Yes, I'll do that, Chair.
Okay. If there's nothing further on Thank you very much, Peter. If there's nothing further on Pension Committee, we'll move to item 7, the Pension Fund Business Plan. You again, Mr. Honeysett?
Yep. Yep, me again, indeed. So the pension fund business plan really is setting out in the appendix, which is quite a detailed appendix, is really setting out the work of the committee over the next 3 years. It's really done so that we can try and manage the committees and obviously workflows, in looking at things like we've got contracts to renew, so we've already spoken about benefits, we've got the actuaries, etc., things like that. But we've also got other things which need to be taken forward on either an annual or a 6-annual basis, or in some cases 3-year basis, in terms of obviously the next actuary, triennial actuarial, things like that. We've also got the major projects which we're doing. So we've got McLeod. I've already spoken briefly about GMP, and we've also got the pensions data service, which again I got an update. That's the interface between payroll and pensions. So this is really to try and set out the work over the different committees and setting out where we need a committee decision or not. So some of it is obviously just pure admin, etc. It doesn't require a specific decision from committee, but they still need to know what's going on in terms of the admin and things that we're doing there. So I think what we're trying to do is just set out here, just be clear where we're going over the next few committees indeed, and then try and set out a plan, which is obviously subject to change. I mean, we have things like COVID thrown in, which changes things, as it did in March and June. So it is it's a document which will change over time, but it gives that outline so officers and members can be aware of what's coming and therefore try and arrange their time and resources efficiently around delivering those things. So I'll stop here. I didn't intend to go into detail of the plan itself unless you really want.
No, we'll give people the opportunity to ask questions.
Yeah.
On it, Michael Honeysett. But we've had the opportunity to read the agenda, so we can ask. Hugo, any questions or comments or anything on this item?
Yeah, I'm just wondering why we're only looking at a 3-year plan. Are there longer term plans that are going to be formulated?
I think we tend to roll this forward on a.
Sorry, can you repeat your question, Hugo?
I was just wondering why there's only a 3-year plan when the longevity of the fund's going to be much, much longer. So just in brief, I was wondering if there was a longer term plan or business plan, or I think Michael's about to say they're on a recurring 3-year basis.
Well, no, what we do is we do roll this forward on an annual basis. So next year we'll look at 2021 to 24. So we try and look in detail at the next 3 years. As you say, it is a long-term game in terms of investments, etc. But that comes into play in terms of our investment strategy of setting that, where they obviously look at the longer term. But the 3-year thing is really, it seems sensible in terms of a realistic being able to lay out what we need to be looking at over that term. So many things change over time, but if we try and go much further into the future than that, it starts becoming not fantasy quite so, but it's just there'll be too many changes to be thinking about. So it's I think it is rolled forward on an annual basis, so we're constantly looking forward at the next 3 years. But obviously with that understanding that overall investment side of it and the funding side is obviously a longer term game.
Of course. Thank you.
Michael Hartley, any questions?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Okay, thanks. I thought it was modest in scale, which I liked, because sometimes some of these documents from pension fund to War and Peace is the data improvement update.
Yeah,
Michael,
that's me
Hand
as
set.
well.
I assume.
Indeed. Yes, it is me. I'm just going to get that paper up as well. Okay. So basically, I'm probably going to go. I mean, I think members of the committee will know. Sorry, the board will know that we've had issues with things like the ABSs over past years, etc. And much of that has been around our data and the way that we can get the data across from particularly the payroll and Hackney Council being the largest employer in particular, therefore that payroll, into the pension system. And obviously at previous boards, we've given updates on the production of the annual benefit statements and also around some of the next steps in terms of where we're going with that interface to try and deal with some of the issues. So what I've done in this paper is given an update on what was left of the 2018-19 statements, because I think at the last committee, at the last board, one of the issues that arose, and this is out in paragraph 7, section 7 of the report, was that there were about 407 members that had been identified where they'd passed their natural retirement date, and that got picked up through the ABS statement. So all these members have now been written to in Quinton to advise that they needed to bring their pension into payment. And as it says there, we've sent chase letters to outstanding members where they haven't responded. And it's still the case that at this point in time, 101 pensions still are not in payment, and we're awaiting members to get back to us. So Equinity are actually chasing those up at the moment. We might need to take further advice if we can't get any response from those members. It might be that we don't have their proper addresses, things like that, but that's what we're trying to find out at the moment. So that was another side issue, if you like, that came out of the annual benefit run in 2018-19. In 2019-20, you may remember 2018-19 in particular, we did see a vast improvement in the number of annual benefit statements that were sent out on time. You'll see from paragraph 8.1 that again, unfortunately, not all statements that needed to be issued were issued by the deadline 31st of August. And it's saying we're working, some of that may be due to the impact of COVID on processes, but I'm certainly not saying that's the main reason. We're looking at it with Equinity to see what could be done in future to make sure they do meet that deadline again. But of the active members, just under 2/3 were sent out on time, with 2,500 over that weren't issued by the 31st of August. By September and October, I think we got to the stage where all but 200 of the active statements have been sent out. So they were late, but there's 200 which is still being dealt with now, and some of those are the more complex cases that the admin are looking at with the employers. In terms of deferred members, it was a better picture. So statements issued within timescales for 7,500, 136 not issued, but there is an issue around statements where we don't have a current address. So we're going to do a tracing exercise and up over the coming months so that we can try and resolve that issue. So of the 136 deferred members statements that weren't sent out on time, another 89 were sent out on 29 by the end of September, and 47 cases are still being queried with the administration team. So obviously, once again, we're looking at the process, or Equinity in particular, looking at some of their processes and try to take some of the further manual processes out of the way they do this. and we're just waiting for Equinity to come back to us with the lessons learned, so we can have a meeting with them to actually take that forward and ensure, hopefully, at future years, or for this year, we can actually get the statements out on time. So in the next step section, obviously the next step as far as the council is concerned is really pushing on with this, and I know we've been speaking about this for a long time, about an interface from the payroll into the pension system. Now I think at the last board we were saying that we were getting very close in terms of an interface, but it was getting very complex. The complexity around that was that there was involved running 7 reports every month, and they all needed to be uploaded into the pensions. They would need to be uploaded into pensions and reconciled, etc. So a different approach has actually been taken and is actually moving forward quite quickly now, and with a major project actually taking place, and with work between Midland, our payroll provider, so we're on a project board and etc. The pension fund, both Equinity and the in-house team, together with ICT, the council's ICT, really looking to produce something that can come direct out of the payroll system rather than relying on 7 extract reports. So it is progressing fairly well at the moment. Well, I say fairly well, it's progressing well. There's obviously some issues, but we are getting to the end of actually scoping the requirements and making sure that the system can actually provide the data that's needed. And we're hopeful of having a first trial run or test data by the end of, just before Christmas. The aim is to get this obviously fully up running by April, so that can then feed into the ABS statement and year-end procedures. So yeah, any questions or comments?
I think quick one from me. I know when we met in
Hugo, any questions or comments?
Am I on mute? No, I'm not. I just know with the annual benefit statements, we talked about that in our last meeting and the kind of issues surrounding that. And I know my colleague who I think retired last year was particularly keen for us to resolve this issue. So I suppose in a nutshell, what are Equinity doing to improve the situation
in terms of the annual benefit statements? But I think it's twofold. So I mean, so we are waiting for them to come back to us around their lessons learned, so that we can then talk to them about they're looking to take some of the manual processes out and review those. But I think we can't underplay the importance of the data that's being fed into the system as well. So we need to make sure that's sorted as well. So it's twofold.
Member statements, almost 33%. I mean, what concerns me is the haven't been issued.
Sorry, you broke up just when you were saying it. Can you?
I suppose on the deferred members, we need to do some sort of data cleansing operation to probably identify those 1,200 members' addresses.
On that, there is the next.
But that's understandable. More concerning is the sort of active members where statements haven't been issued because it's just such a high percentage of the overall number.
On the active, so there's about 200 outstanding at the moment.
Do we on that?
And during that relation.
And is that because of complexity of calculating what their benefit?
I think that is around issues around the calculations, etc. So, and that's what they're looking at. Yeah.
Right.
But again, we do need to ensure that the processes are in place to make sure those complex cases are picked up early on, so that they can again be issued on time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Michael, I just had one question.
Yeah.
Michael Hartney, have you got any comments or questions?
Yeah, I just had one question on 7.2, where we've got 100 odd members over normal retirement age. is the authority or Quinity looking at maybe some mortality tracing, because some of those members could have passed away since they left Hackney?
Yeah, I think they will do. I mean, we do. I can't remember the frequency, but we do a fairly regular exercise to pick up where, well, to make sure people aren't. We look at it from the other side actually, and to make sure we've got proof that people are still alive that their pensions should be in payment. But yes, I accept we then need to look at these ones because they're slightly they are a different issue, aren't they? They're payments that aren't in payment. So as I say, Liquidity have sent out. They've identified, well, what was it, 300 and put into payment. And there's this remaining 101 where they are sending out further chaser letters, but they will need to, as it said in the report, well, we need to think, if we don't get a response, we then need to think about what we do with those and how we can deal with them.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just one idea that I had.
Yeah, no, indeed, that's I'll take that on board. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam.
Following up that point, do these people, if people don't take their pension, when it comes due, do we accrue back pay for them, or is it tough luck? If you don't apply for it, we don't stop paying it until you apply for it.
That's a good question. I think you end up getting you get it from I believe, and I'll check on this. You get it from the date that you apply, but because you've effectively deferred, I believe you therefore get an enhanced pension slightly.
Do you want me to pick up this one, Michael?
Yeah, detail that.
So for this group of people, these are people who should have had their pension paid from their normal retirement age, which for most of them will be 60 or thereabouts. So at the point these benefits are brought into payment, they will get the arrears back to 60. And the fund does also have to pay some interest on the late, because the benefits are being paid later than they should have been. There is also interest payable as well.
So do we accrue for that in the accounts? Because that's it's not clear how long
these 100 members.
Yeah, I don't believe we will have done, because we tend to, the benefits payments are basically on a cash basis in the accounts. But I can check.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
it'd be just good to understand the scale of kind of if suddenly all of those extra 100 and it'd be 300 extra pensioners. But it may not make a big move, but quite curious.
Yeah, no.
Okay, thank you very much. That was my only question following on from that. Okay, so whilst we're on the data problems being solved, item 9, GMP and McLeod.
Indeed, again, so I'm going to pick up some of this, and Catherine will probably come in on the McLeod one. I think that was what we spoke about, wasn't it, Catherine?
Yeah.
Yep. Let me just find my paper. There we go. So I think we've spoken about GMP rectification in previous board meetings, etc. So I'll just give a quick update on where we are on that. I've already mentioned it actually. So most of this report is giving background to the situation, but paragraph 7 is the actual update. So the GMP rectification, as I said, it's now in its final stages, and certainly aim to complete before the beginning of April. And that is an important date, because if we haven't done it by then, we need to then recalculate, because pension increases are applied to benefits. So obviously we want to avoid having to do that. As it says in paragraph 7.2, we believe we're on target to actually make adjustments to pensions in February 21. The idea is that pensioners will receive 2 months' notice of any change. What I will look to do is bring further details of actual numbers of pensioners impacted and the financial implications back to the March committee and the board. As part of that exercise and linked to this, we'll need to take a policy paper to committee around over and underpayments, which we're currently working on, and will agree at January January committee, so we can then deal with anything that falls out of the GMP reconciliation in line with that policy. So that's GMP. In terms of McLeod, well, shall I hand over to you for this one?
Yeah, no problem.
Just take questions to Michael
Sorry.
on. I was going to say take questions to Michael on GMP first.
Okay, yeah.
That's okay. Any questions?
Not for me.
Not for me, thank you.
Michael Hartney. And I think Michael Hartney. Okay, great. Catherine, go ahead on McLeod.
Okay, thank you. Aon's role with McLeod is to provide programme management. The bulk of the work will obviously be done by Equinity and the Hackney Pensions team working together. I should clarify that I'm not the one directly involved. It's a couple of my colleagues that are leading the McLeod project for Aon, but I have had an update of where they are. So there's been quite a few meetings. So programme management documentation has been put in place, including a programme charter setting out what the objectives are and the measures of success. The work's been divided into a number of work streams, which include things like data, communications, finance, governance, benefits rectification. Some of those work streams can't start yet. The consultation on the draft regulations that will allow the McLeod changes to happen closed earlier this year, and they're still going through the responses, and we're awaiting the consultation response. But there is work that can be ongoing, particularly around collecting data from employers that the fund may not already have. So the data and communications work streams are the ones that have really kicked off to start with, and there's been 3 meetings of each. The employers have had a warm-up communication telling them that they will be getting a request for various items of data, and I believe it's proposed that the actual request will be going out hopefully in the not too distant future. It's just subject to final sign-off. The proposal is to allow the employers initially until the end of January to provide the requested data. That does leave a little bit of leeway for them to go a little bit beyond that if they need to. And obviously the work will then proceed looking at the data that comes back and what's there, what isn't there, any assumptions that need to be made, and so on. The communications work stream has been looking at obviously the employer communications, but also starting a little bit to think about the member communications to keep them updated on what's going on. The finance work stream hasn't started yet, but it's hopeful the first meeting of that will be imminent to get that work stream going. Other work streams such as benefit rectification can't really proceed until the outcome of the consultation's known, so we know exactly what needs to happen and so on. But as well as the actual meetings, there's been work ongoing in the background to put together things like risk logs and finalising various other bits of the programme documentation as well. I don't think there's anything particularly else that I wanted to say, so hopefully that's enough of an update for you at the moment. But any questions?
None from me. Hugo's shaking his head, so I'll take that as a no. Can't see you, Michael Hartney, if you've got any questions.
No, thank you.
None for me.
Okay, so lots of fun to be had in the future on McLeod then, presumably.
Indeed,
Look forward to
indeed.
that. Okay, pensions board work plan. So item 10, usual fun and excitement. We'll talk about McLeod and hopefully stop talking about GMP in boards to come.
Indeed.
Any requests from members about what they feel we should have training on?
I'm quite relaxed.
No? Okay, well then, yeah, then whatever seems appropriate when it gets around to March. I mean, I think it's, I think they're good to have the kind of piece of training, kind of updating us. So I'm sure there's something that we'll need telling about by then. So I think they're helpful.
I just had
Other
one
than that,
suggestion to keep in mind was
Okay.
the pensions dashboard. There's apparently going to be some announcements and updates towards the end of the year next year that might provide us with a bit more clarity. And as it's around data and things like that, which we've just touched on in many areas of what we're seeing with the benefit statements and things like that and the interfaces, it might be advisable for us to have an earlier session than we would normally have.
Yep, makes sense.
So are you arguing that you suggesting that we go earlier than the 17th of March, Michael?
No. Just to bear it in mind, if there is some progress and it might be appropriate for March, then it might be an idea to have a little training session about what that impact might be on the authority. But no, not earlier than March 2021.
Okay. All right. Any other business? I haven't been notified of any, so
Not from me.
anything happened since we started talking at 10 o'clock? Okay, well, see everyone. I hope your camera is fixed next time, Michael Hartney.
Yeah.
That'd be great. And Gray, you'll send out links to the fund session so that we can.
Yes, I will, Chair.
Great, thanks everyone. See you next time, if not before.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys.
Before.
Well.
Thanks, everyone.